He looked me dead in the eye across the table and said, "She could do way better than you." Everyone laughed, even her. I didn't say a word, but the silence that followed was the last peaceful moment of his week. I remember the exact moment I realized things would never be the same again. The restaurant smelled faintly of roasted garlic and burning candles, the air thick with the kind of warmth that makes people lean closer across tables, pretending they're comfortable in each other's presence. Soft jazz murmured from speakers tucked into corners, barely audible, like a secret trying not to disturb the unfolding tension. I sat there, my hands flat on the polished wooden table, feeling the weight of their eyes on me in a way that made every heartbeat echo through my chest. Across from me, he sat, the kind of person who always seemed to know the exact words to strike a nerve. That night he wore a dark blazer over a crisp white shirt, the top button undone, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal a sliver of skin that suggested casual confidence. His eyes, cold and precise, locked onto mine, and he said it. "She could do way better than you. Support our channel. Like, share, and subscribe. Your clicks help us bring you even better videos." The words didn't land with a thud. They floated in the air, suspended by the quiet hum of the restaurant, and yet they carried a weight that crushed everything beneath it. I felt it immediately, deep in my chest, where anger and disbelief collided. Everyone around us laughed, not a polite, half-hearted chuckle, but a full-bodied release of amusement that made the corners of my stomach twist. Even her, sitting next to me, her fingers lightly brushing mine in a gesture I had once thought was tender, smiled and laughed, like his words were some clever joke at my expense. I didn't say a word. My mouth felt suddenly heavy, my tongue an anchor tied to some deep, inexplicable reserve. I could feel the burn creeping up my neck, my ears ringing slightly from the sudden flood of adrenaline. I kept my eyes on him, holding his gaze longer than anyone should, letting the silence stretch into something palpable. It wasn't just the words he spoke, but the deliberate, calculated delivery, the way he expected me to crumble, the way he assumed my shame would be performative. And maybe it would have been if this was a story anyone else could have told. But not me, not that night. The candlelight flickered, casting brief shadows across the table. I could see the faint tremor in his hand as he reached for his wineglass, a detail no one else noticed, but I did. The wine swirled lazily as he tilted the glass, sipping slowly, thinking perhaps that the calm in my silence was fear. I let him believe it. There was a sharp edge to the silence that followed, one that I could almost taste, bitter and metallic. The waiter passed by, oblivious, carrying a tray of dishes that clinked softly. A single note of the piano carried over the table, and for a moment I imagined myself outside of that scene, watching like a spectator to some cruel play. But I wasn't a spectator. I was a participant, and I had plans he didn't even know existed. I could see the amusement in her eyes fade ever so slightly, a flicker of doubt that passed unnoticed by the others. She leaned back in her chair, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, her laughter still just enough for me to catch it. The air shifted. People around us began to eat again, to chatter, to pretend the moment had never happened, but the quiet between him and me remained. It was mine now, a heavy, unspoken promise. I didn't move. I didn't blink, and in that pause I swore I could see the moment before his composure cracked. He thought he had won. But I had already decided that night would not end in humiliation, not in that way. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spoke, my voice low, steady, and more deliberate than I had intended. "Maybe," I said, "but tonight, that's not what matters." The words barely registered to anyone but him. I could see the micro-expression, the quick tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes. He didn't say anything after that. He didn't need to. I had planted a seed, one that would take root far beyond the walls of this restaurant, far beyond the laughter of a crowd that didn't know any better. Dinner continued as if nothing had happened. Glasses clinked, forks scraped against plates, and I smiled politely at the conversation around me, all while silently noting every detail, his posture, her gestures, the way the candlelight caught the curve of her hair. My mind was calculating, plotting, constructing invisible pathways that no one else could see. The world moved forward around me, but I existed in a single moment, one that expanded and contracted, depending on how he reacted to it, depending on the tension, coiled inside me like a spring ready to snap. After the meal, we stepped out into the night. The street was slick with rain, reflecting the neon glow of signs and streetlights in 100 fractured colors. The air smelled of wet asphalt and something faintly floral, the remnants of a bakery a few doors down. I walked with her, arm brushing against hers, feeling the warmth and rhythm of her steps, all the while knowing he followed at a distance. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel him there, feeling the weight of his own underestimation. The city lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. We turned down a narrow alley, the kind that seemed to exist only in the quiet hours when the world had decided to forget its own noise. Here, I finally let a smile play at the corners of my mouth, subtle, almost imperceptible, because the night had just begun, and I had plans that no one could predict. Not him, not her, not anyone. I had learned something crucial early in life. The ones who underestimate you are often the most dangerous, because they never see the storm gathering just beneath your calm. And that night, I was that storm. The next morning, I woke to a pale light slicing through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the floor. The world outside felt ordinary, indifferent, but inside my chest, the rhythm of last night's events pulsed with a quiet insistence. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't check messages. There was a luxury in the ignorance of the world around me, the way it went on, unaware of the quiet storm I had set in motion. She called me around noon. Her voice carried a soft urgency, the kind that comes from someone teetering on the edge of realizing a mistake. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked. I smiled even though she couldn't see me. "Better than you might think," I said. My tone was casual, like sunlight glinting off glass, but underneath it was a current of warning, subtle, imperceptible unless you listened closely. She laughed, a light, nervous sound. "You're so calm after last night. I don't know how you do it." I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch, letting it press against her like a gentle weight. "Calm is underrated," I finally said. "Sometimes the quiet tells more than 1,000 words." She paused. I could almost hear her pondering my meaning, her fingers brushing against her lips, her mind racing through scenarios she didn't fully understand. I had learned to speak in half-truths, in glimmers of insight that only I could navigate fully. And at that moment, I realized the game had begun, a game whose rules only I understood. By evening, I found myself back at the restaurant, not as a guest, but as a ghost of the night before. I sat at a table in the corner, the one that offered the perfect vantage point for observation. The place was quieter than usual, the kind of lull that comes just before something changes irrevocably. He walked in, sharply dressed again, but there was an edge to him now, something brittle beneath the confident exterior. I saw him scan the room, his gaze flicking toward the shadows of my corner, though I didn't move. I didn't need to. He sat with a group, laughter spilling over the table like a river, but I could see it was strained, artificial, a mask over something that threatened to break through. I sipped my water slowly, savoring the way it cooled the back of my throat, letting every second stretch like a drawn bow. I didn't approach. I didn't make eye contact. I let him stew, his mind wandering into corners he wouldn't admit existed. Later, I followed him, quietly, not stalking, not aggressively, just presence, a shadow at the edge of awareness. He left the restaurant, hailed a cab, and I watched as the vehicle disappeared into the rain-slick streets. I didn't move until I was sure he had reached his apartment. Then I lingered near the street corner, waiting, the drizzle coating my hair and shoulders in cold beads of water. By the time I returned home, I felt the familiar buzz of anticipation, the thrill that comes from being untouchable, from knowing you are steps ahead in a game no one else realizes is happening. I made tea, watched the steam curl in the dim light of my kitchen, and thought of him. Thought of how fragile confidence could be, how easily it could fracture under the weight of perception and misjudgment. Over the next few days, the pattern unfolded. He reached out to mutual acquaintances, asking questions, seeking confirmation, fishing for reassurance that the world was still on his side. Every time he spoke, every laugh that followed, I caught it, the tremor in his tone, the hesitation behind the carefully crafted sentences. He was unraveling, piece by piece, and I watched from the periphery, patient, calculated. She texted me late one night, almost too casually, but with a subtle urgency I could feel through the words. I don't know what's happening, but he's acting off. Do you know something? I let the message sit, unseen for hours, and then replied with something neutral, almost benign. People always act off when they realize the truth isn't what they imagined. Her response came quickly. The truth? What truth? I smiled at the screen. Half-truths were my favorite weapon. Full exposure was too easy, too blunt. I preferred the slow burn, the tension that built layer by layer, until the walls of perception crumbled under their own weight. By midweek, the subtle game had escalated. I noticed him at a cafe, sipping coffee with the same group of friends who had laughed the night we dined together. His eyes kept darting toward the entrance, toward tables that didn't concern him, scanning for me as if the mere thought of my presence was a threat. I didn't appear. I never did. I existed only as an idea now, a specter at the edge of his reality, and it was working. And then came the first accident. It was a minor thing, almost insignificant, yet it had the precision of intention that made it unmistakable. His car wouldn't start. A simple electrical issue, a dead battery. But the timing, the circumstances, it was unnerving. He cursed under his breath, checking his phone repeatedly, as though the universe had decided to betray him personally. The next morning, another small disruption. He missed an important meeting because a street construction project had rerouted traffic unexpectedly. Again, minor, plausible, but the weight of accumulation began to tell a story he couldn't ignore. I wasn't the one orchestrating these incidents directly, but the way I moved through the world ensured that they happened. The universe, it seemed, bent around intention when guided carefully. He felt the friction of it, the tiny edges of chaos that no one else noticed, but that consumed him entirely. And all the while, she remained at the center of it. She didn't realize the storm forming around us, didn't see the tension I had seeded, the way he had begun to fracture internally. Yet, even in her oblivion, she was drawn to me, seeking guidance, understanding, perhaps even protection. I didn't offer it outright. I let her lean into the subtle gravity. I exerted, knowing the awareness would come eventually, and it would hit with the force of revelation. By the weekend, he had begun confronting people directly, asking pointed questions, probing for answers in a way that was almost desperate. I watched from a distance, as a casual acquaintance, someone who had no idea what was unfolding, tried to reassure him. I could see the strain in the interactions, the way he clutched his coffee cup a little too tightly, or the way his voice faltered despite every effort to sound composed. I began to leave subtle signs for him to notice, notes left on tables, messages that seemed like accidents, coincidences that made him question his own judgment. Each was a whisper in the chaos, a thread unraveling in his carefully constructed reality. And it worked. It worked too well. By Tuesday, I could feel it. The tension had reached a critical point. He was no longer the confident, untouchable figure who had delivered the cruel words across our table. He was wary, jittery, scanning for threats, analyzing casual encounters as if every glance concealed a hidden message. And the irony was delicious. He didn't suspect me. He couldn't. I had learned the art of invisibility, the power of perception, the control that comes from being both present and absent at once. Then came the confrontation I had been waiting for. Not by design, but by the inevitability of accumulated tension. I was walking through the park near our usual cafe when he appeared, unexpectedly, at the curve in the path. He stopped a few feet away, eyes sharp, body rigid. "You," he said. No preamble, no greeting, just the weight of accusation hanging in the space between us. I tilted my head, taking in the way the afternoon sun caught the edges of his hair, the subtle tremor in his hands, the tense set of his jaw. "Yes," I replied simply, almost lazily, letting the words stretch in the air like a rope between us. "You've been, what? Following me? Watching me?" The words stumbled out, jagged, desperate. I didn't answer immediately. I let the shadows of the trees stretch across his face, let the wind tug at the hem of my coat, let the world contract into this singular, taut moment. "I've been present," I said finally. "That's all." He took a step closer, anger and fear mingling in the furrow of his brow. "Present? You call this?" He gestured vaguely, as if the air around us was tangible proof of my interference. "What you've done, it's insane." I smiled, slow, deliberate. "Sanity is a flexible concept," I said. Sometimes it's the perception of others, not the actions themselves, that defines it. His breathing quickened. I could feel the tension vibrating in the space around us, a low hum that made the hair on my arms stand on end. And then, almost imperceptibly, I saw it, the split second where he realized that the chaos, the disruptions, the way the world had seemed to tilt against him, it wasn't random. Someone was guiding it, someone who had always been 3 steps ahead. He took another step back, confusion overtaking anger now. You did this? I shrugged. I didn't need to, I said. You were doing it yourself. His expression faltered, disbelief and dawning terror mingling in a way that made the moment almost beautiful. The predator had become prey, the confident man reduced to someone questioning every choice, every glance, every word. And I stood there, calm, composed, knowing the storm had reached him. And yet, even then, the night was far from over. By the time evening fell, the city seemed to shift in tone. The streetlights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement, and the air smelled faintly of rain and exhaust. I could feel the pulse of the night, slow, deliberate, almost as if it had synchronized with the rhythm I carried in my chest. I walked toward the apartment we shared, not literally, but the shared space of proximity where she existed, where he might follow, where the tension stretched taut between all of us like a wire ready to snap. He had begun to leave traces of himself everywhere, accidental notes, messages sent to mutual friends, subtle, almost desperate attempts to gauge my movements. He was unraveling faster than I had anticipated, and a part of me, a dark, quiet part, marveled at how perfectly the pieces had begun to fall. But the other part, the part that lingered in the shadows and observed, reminded me that this game was far from over. I arrived at the cafe near her apartment, the one with the flickering neon sign that always made everything feel cinematic. The interior was warm, a soft hum of chatter and coffee machines blending with the low buzz of fluorescent lights. I watched her sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her expression thoughtful. The corners of her lips tugged slightly downward in contemplation. I could see the tension of her weak, pressing into her posture, the subtle way her shoulders curved inward, as if bracing against an invisible weight. I slid into the seat opposite her, letting the steam from my coffee rise between us, a veil of calm in the storm that had begun to consume him. "You look different," I said, letting my voice carry the faintest hint of intrigue. She glanced up, startled by the observation. "Different how?" "Stronger," I said. "More aware. You're noticing things now, things you weren't before." She smiled faintly, unsure whether to take it as a compliment or a warning. "Maybe," she murmured. "Or maybe I'm just tired." I tilted my head, observing the subtle play of light and shadow across her features. "Tired is different from aware," I said. "You'll see soon enough." I could feel it then, the first ripple of change in the equilibrium. He was no longer just a figure lurking in the background. He was actively seeking answers, and that search made him predictable, and predictability was a tool I wielded carefully. The following morning, I received a text from him. "We need to talk. Now." No preamble, no hesitation, just the raw urgency of someone teetering on the edge. I let it sit, knowing that impatience was a weakness, and that a well-timed pause could dismantle even the most fortified confidence. By evening, I found myself at the park again, the same winding paths, lined with trees whose leaves whispered with the wind. He was already there, pacing near the fountain, the water catching the last light of the day and scattering it in fractured patterns across the cobblestones. When he saw me, his expression hardened, a blend of accusation and disbelief etched into the lines of his face. "You've gone too far," he said immediately. No hello, no attempt at civility, just the weight of his anger pressing against the space between us. I let the words hang. "Too far?" I asked. My tone was soft, almost casual, but beneath it lay the precision of intent. "Or just far enough to reveal the truth." He took a step closer, eyes flashing. "What truth? That you're manipulating everything, that you're some kind of, I don't even know." I didn't answer immediately. I let the water in the fountain catch the last rays of sunlight, sending sparks of light dancing across the ground. "You see what you choose to see," I said finally. "Perception is a tricky thing. Sometimes it hides what's obvious." He laughed, but it was hollow, brittle. "Obvious? Nothing about this is obvious. You've been everywhere, everything. I can't even." His words broke into fragments, carried off by the wind, by his own inability to articulate the chaos he was feeling. I studied him quietly, noting the subtle quiver in his hands, the way his jaw tightened as he fought to maintain composure. He had believed himself untouchable once, and now the world had begun to shrink around him, closing in with every misstep, every coincidence that seemed too deliberate to be natural. And then, without warning, she appeared. She stepped out from behind a line of trees, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. Her eyes flicked between us, narrowing slightly as she sensed the tension, the unspoken danger that hung like a storm cloud. "What's going on?" she asked, voice trembling, but trying to mask the tremor with strength. He turned to her, his frustration spilling over. "You don't understand. He's been—" "Stop," I said. The word was sharp, cutting through the air, commanding attention without aggression. They both froze, eyes flicking toward me, the weight of authority implicit in my calm. "Enough. This isn't about blame. This isn't about fear. It's about reality." Her brows furrowed. "Reality?" she echoed. I leaned back slightly, letting the tension stretch, observing the dynamic shift under the pressure of my words. "Yes, reality," I said, "and reality is often hidden beneath layers we refuse to see. Sometimes it takes disruption, chaos, to reveal what's true." He laughed, a sound bordering on hysteria now. "Disruption? Chaos? You're insane. You've been—" I didn't let him finish. I shook my head, faintly amused. "I've been patient. I've been careful. And yet, here you are, unraveling before your own eyes. That's not my doing. That's yours. Your arrogance, your assumptions, your inability to read the room. That's what's brought you here." She looked between us, confusion and dawning understanding warring in her expression. What do you mean?" I smiled, subtle, precise. "He underestimated me. He thought words alone could diminish someone he saw as weaker, and in underestimating, he set the stage for everything that followed. The world simply bent to reveal the truth." He recoiled slightly, disbelief and fear mingling in a way that made his vulnerability almost tangible. "This is insane. You're enjoying this." I shrugged lightly. "Enjoying is a simplistic term," I said. "Understanding, observing, guiding, that is far more accurate." She looked at me, her eyes wide, searching for something tangible to anchor her understanding. "Guiding? What do you mean?" I leaned forward, letting the shadows of the trees stretch across his face, across hers, letting the night's chill underscore the moment. "Sometimes people need to see themselves clearly," I said. "Not through the lens of others' perceptions, but through the fractures they create when they assume control they don't possess." He needed to see it, and now he is. For the first time, he looked truly afraid, not of me personally, but of the reflection I had held up to the world. He saw the consequences of arrogance, the fragility beneath confidence, and it terrified him more than any confrontation ever could. And then she reached out, tentatively, placing a hand on my arm. Is he going to be okay?" I looked at her, noting the quiet strength beneath her worry, the way concern softened her otherwise sharp demeanor. "That depends," I said, "on him, on whether he can recognize what he's done. Sometimes the truth is enough to save a person. Sometimes it destroys them." The air around us thickened, the fountain's water reflecting the flickering street lights, casting fractured images across our faces. He took a step back, running a hand through his hair, muttering something under his breath I couldn't quite catch. The realization was settling in. The consequences of his arrogance, the cost of his underestimation. I stayed calm, letting him spiral, letting her observe, letting the night carry its weight. I had learned long ago that the most profound influence comes not from force, but from subtlety, from the quiet shaping of perception, from the patient nudging of reality. And in this moment, the balance had shifted irreversibly. By the time we parted that night, he was silent. Not defiant, not angry, but subdued, as if the air itself had stolen his voice. She walked beside me, close, unspoken understanding forming between us. And as the city lights blurred past, reflected in rain-slicked streets, I realized that the game was far from over. It had only entered its final act. But the final act, I knew, would not be a matter of confrontation or revelation alone. It would be far more intimate, far more devastating, because the ultimate truth had yet to surface, and when it did, it would change everything for all of us. The night air had a different quality as I stepped onto the street, a strange stillness that made every sound sharper, every shadow more defined. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving puddles that reflected the neon signs like fractured mirrors. I could feel the pulse of the city beneath my feet, a rhythm that mirrored the tension in my chest. The last few days had been a delicate game of observation, subtle manipulation, and unspoken power, but now it had reached the point where subtlety alone was not enough. The storm was approaching, and I could hear it in every creak of the street lamp, every distant honk echoing off wet asphalt. She had insisted on walking with me again. There was a quiet urgency in her steps, a desire to understand that she couldn't quite articulate. Her hand brushed mine occasionally, light, almost casual, but the contact sent an electric charge through me I couldn't ignore. We moved in silence for a while, letting the cityscape speak, letting the night carry the weight of the past week. Finally she broke the silence. "Do you think he knows yet?" Her voice was low, tentative, but there was an edge of concern that made me pause. I looked at her, really looked, the way you study a painting, noting every shadow, every line. "He's beginning to," I said, "but knowing and accepting are two different things, and I don't think he's ready to accept yet." Her lips pressed together. "And if he never does?" I didn't answer immediately. I let my gaze drift to the reflection of the streetlights in the puddles, letting the water distort my own image before continuing. "Then he'll collapse under the weight of his own assumptions, and the world will continue, indifferent, as if nothing happened. Sometimes that's the harshest truth of all." We reached the park, the same one where so many confrontations had taken place, and the fountain now seemed almost ominous in the dark. The water glimmered with fractured reflections, echoing the tension that had become almost tangible. I could feel the weight of his presence even before he appeared, like the prelude of a storm, a subtle vibration in the air that made every nerve in my body alert. He emerged from the shadows, his movements hesitant, cautious, like a predator unsure of its prey. His eyes locked on mine immediately, and for the first time I saw something beyond fear, a flicker of desperation. His carefully constructed confidence had eroded, leaving raw vulnerability in its place. "You've been everywhere," he said, voice low, dangerous. "Everywhere I go, there you are, watching, waiting. I can't escape you." I leaned casually against the edge of the fountain, letting the cool mist from the water touch my face. "Escape isn't necessary," I said. "Not yet. The lesson isn't finished. You see, the problem with arrogance is that it blinds you to the smallest details until they pile up and crush you. And right now, you're standing on the edge of a pile that's grown higher than you realize." His hands clenched into fists. "I don't understand. Why me? Why this? I didn't do anything to—" "You did," I interrupted softly, "by believing that words could wound someone more than actions, by assuming strength is only in what is seen, like by underestimating quietly, subtly. Everything you've done has led you here, and yet you can't see the pattern, can't see the truth." She stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm, hesitating. "Please, calm down," she said. "We just want to understand. Why are you doing this?" I looked at her, then at him, letting the silence stretch, thick and suffocating. "Understanding comes in layers," I said, "and some layers are hard to see until the moment is right." He staggered back slightly, a mixture of anger and fear contorting his features. "Layers? You think I'll just stand here and let this happen? Let you manipulate me like some pawn?" I smiled faintly, an almost imperceptible curl of the lips. "Pawn implies ignorance. You're not ignorant, you're arrogant, and arrogance is far more fragile." His breathing quickened. He took another step back, almost tripping over a puddle, and I could see the shift, the moment where a man realizes that control is an illusion, that the foundation he's built his life on is crumbling beneath him. I let him feel it. I let the tension coil like a snake around his chest, tightening with every heartbeat. And then I spoke softly, almost too quiet to hear, but loaded with weight. "Do you remember the restaurant? The words you said? Everyone laughed, even her." His eyes flickered with recognition, and I could see the memory strike him like lightning. I didn't." "You did," I said, "and you underestimated me. You thought silence was weakness. You were wrong." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth, and for a moment the three of us stood in the park, frozen in a tableau of tension, fear, and revelation. The city continued around us, oblivious, indifferent, but for him the world had narrowed to a singular focus, the consequences of underestimation. He laughed then, but it was unhinged, bordering on hysteria. Consequences? You can't do this. This isn't real. It can't be. It's real, I said calmly, because you allowed it to be. You created the conditions. I merely illuminated them. Her eyes widened. You mean this has all been a lesson? I nodded slightly. Yes, a lesson in perception, in arrogance, in understanding that strength isn't always loud, isn't always visible. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and exacting. And sometimes it's devastating. He staggered, grabbing at a tree for support. This is insane. You've gone too far. I stepped closer, letting the shadows stretch across his face. No, I said softly, deliberately. You went too far. I merely responded in kind. The storm doesn't begin because of the wind alone. It begins because someone lit the spark. She looked between us, her hand still on his arm, her expression conflicted. But what now? I paused, considering her carefully. Now, truth must surface. You must see the full pattern. Not the fragments, not the moments, but the entire story. Only then will the weight of understanding settle properly. And then I watched him break. Not physically, not dramatically, but in that subtle, irreversible way where someone realizes they are small in a world they once thought they controlled. His eyes darted, scanning for exits, for answers, for something tangible, and found only emptiness, reflection, and consequence. You're, he started, voice trembling. You're insane. Insane, I echoed, letting the word float, or simply aware. The rain began again, soft at first, then heavier, coating the park in a veil of liquid silver. The fountain's water rippled with the impact, casting jagged reflections across our faces. He fell to his knees, not in submission, but in sudden, overwhelming realization. The arrogance, the assumptions, the underestimation, it all collapsed at once, leaving raw fear and comprehension intertwined. She knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his shoulder. It's okay, she whispered. We can fix this. I shook my head slowly. Some things cannot be fixed. Some lessons cannot be undone. The streetlights flickered, one by one, and I knew the night had reached its pivotal moment. The culmination of tension, manipulation, and subtle orchestration was at hand. He would remember this night for the rest of his life, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as revelation. And when he finally understood the full scope of what had been set into motion, it would be undeniable, inescapable, and unforgettable. I stepped back, letting the rain wash over me, feeling its chill, feeling the sharp clarity it brought. The night was alive, every shadow a whisper, every reflection a fragment of truth. And in that moment, I understood the full measure of what I had done, not just to him, but to everyone involved, including her. The storm wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but the pieces were in place, and when the final act arrived, it would shatter everything. The night was heavier than I had expected, as if the city itself had leaned closer to witness the final act. Rain poured relentlessly, drumming against the pavement, splattering in puddles that reflected fractured neon lights. The fountain glimmered under the street lamps, the water trembling as if it sensed the tension in the air. I stood on the edge of the park, feeling the cold rain soak through my coat, the chill crawling up my spine. Every instinct told me the end was near, the culmination of days of observation, subtle maneuvers, and quiet manipulation. He was still on his knees near the fountain, drenched, trembling, his hands gripping the stone edge as though it could anchor him against a storm raging inside. She crouched beside him, her hand on his shoulder, whispering reassurances he no longer seemed capable of receiving. And I stood, a calm presence, letting the chaos around him compress into a single, unforgettable moment. I need to understand, he said finally, voice breaking, almost lost beneath the patter of rain. I need to understand what you've been doing, why, and everything. I studied him for a long moment, allowing the anticipation to stretch into infinity. The city blurred around us, leaving only the three of us in sharp, surreal focus. Do you really want to understand? I asked softly. Because understanding comes with a cost. Once you see the full picture, there is no going back, no excuses, no denial, no hiding behind arrogance or laughter. He swallowed hard, nodding, though the hesitation lingered in his trembling hands. She squeezed his shoulder, her expression taut but resolute. Yes, she said firmly. We need to know. I took a slow step forward, letting the water ripple beneath my feet, letting the cold rain sting my skin. Then pay attention, I said, because the first thing you must understand is this. Your perception of reality has been your greatest enemy. He blinked, confused, uncertain. What do you mean? I let a smile curve my lips, subtle, deliberate. You believe that strength is measured by words spoken, by laughter that follows, by control assumed over others. You thought you could dominate with confidence, with arrogance, with judgment, but strength, true strength, is not what you show. It is what you wield in silence, in patience, in observation, and you underestimated it. You underestimated me. He shook his head violently. No, that's impossible. I was careful. I watched. I controlled everything. Did you? I said softly. Or did you only believe you did? Did you see the signs, the subtle movements, the moments you dismissed? Every glance, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt you ignored. Those were the cracks forming beneath your feet, and you walked across them anyway, blind. She gasped slightly, sensing the depth of what I was saying. You planned all of this? I shook my head slowly. No, not planned exactly, but observed, guided. Sometimes chaos itself is enough to teach a lesson when someone refuses to see the truth clearly. You created the stage. I merely let the performance unfold. He staggered to his feet, rain dripping from his hair, clothes plastered to his body. His eyes darted around, searching, desperate, trying to find an explanation that would make sense in his fractured understanding. This isn't real. You're insane. I stepped closer, letting the rain coat my hair and shoulders, dripping onto the stone beneath. Perhaps, I said, or perhaps I am simply awake in a world where most sleep through their arrogance. The wind picked up, bending the trees, sending leaves swirling around us. He took another step back, eyes wide, searching for escape, for reason, for any anchor. Why? Why her? He asked, voice almost a whisper. Why involve her in this? I looked at her, then back at him. Because she is the constant, the observer, the one who matters. She sees what others cannot, and you needed to understand that perception is a tool far more powerful than words. He stumbled, gripping the fountain again. The realization was sinking in, the depth of his misjudgment, the consequences of underestimation, and then I revealed the final piece. You remember the restaurant, I said, voice barely above the rain, when you said she could do better than me, when everyone laughed. That was the spark. That small, careless cruelty, it set everything in motion. You assumed it was insignificant, a fleeting moment, but you underestimated the weight of silence. You underestimated what happens when someone refuses to react in anger, refuses to fight back in the obvious way. You gave me the advantage, without even knowing it. He fell silent, blinking rapidly, as if trying to erase the memory from his mind. I don't understand, he whispered. You will, I said. But first, you must recognize something else. The lesson is not only for you. It is for all who assume they hold the power. True power lies not in what you can control overtly, but in what you fail to notice, in the subtle currents that shape the world while you focus on noise. She stepped closer, placing her hand on mine. And what does this mean for us? I turned to her, the rain glistening on my eyelashes, the night sharp and precise around us. It means that clarity has a cost. Understanding is rarely comfortable. Sometimes it hurts more than ignorance. But it is worth it. You see the world differently now, not through illusion, but through observation, through patience, through awareness. And that is freedom. He sank to the ground again, head in his hands, shivering, drenched, broken, but not in the way he expected, not physically, but in a way that exposed the raw truth of his own mind, the consequences of arrogance, the fragility beneath assumed control. And then I revealed the final, shocking truth, something he could not have anticipated, something no one could. The moments you thought were coincidences, the disruptions, the missteps, every one of them was influenced by understanding reality, by seeing the subtle interactions of the world and guiding them quietly. But you will realize that I did not need to do much. The world itself, when observed, is willing to teach those who refuse to learn. I merely became the lens. His head shot up, eyes wide, searching for deception, for trickery, for some hidden hand. So you're saying everything was natural? I did this to myself? I nodded slowly. Yes, and no. You created the conditions. I merely ensured that the mirror was clear enough for you to see yourself. The rest was reality correcting itself around the arrogance you assumed was invisible. The rain continued to fall, relentless, drumming on the fountain, on the pavement, on our clothes. I could feel the tension dissipate slightly, not completely, not yet, but the weight of revelation had begun to settle over him, over her. over the night itself. You can't be human, he whispered finally. No one could orchestrate all of this. I smiled faintly. Human, yes. Careful, patient, observant, yes. But nothing more than that. And yet, that is more than enough to shift everything. She looked at me, eyes searching, the faintest trace of awe mingling with understanding. And now? She asked. Now, I said, glancing back at him, then to the shimmering water of the fountain. We let the world continue. But the world will never be the same for him, nor for anyone who witnesses this clarity, this precision, this understanding of consequence. The night has ended, but the truth will echo. He remained kneeling for a long while, rain-soaked and silent, the storm outside matching the storm within him. And as I watched, I realized the profound effect of perception, patience, and observation, not just on him, but on everyone who had underestimated the quiet strength of awareness. The rain slowed. The neon lights reflected sharply in the puddles, casting distorted, fractured images across our faces. She and I walked away slowly, leaving him by the fountain, a man forever changed by the consequences of his arrogance. The city continued around us, indifferent, unaware, and yet the echoes of the night lingered, subtle, insistent, unrelenting. As we disappeared into the misty streets, I let the final truth settle. The most powerful moments are often unseen, unacknowledged, and yet unavoidable. A lesson taught silently, a storm unnoticed until it strikes, a revelation that leaves one changed forever. Have you ever underestimated someone because they remained quiet or unreactive? Can patience and observation be more powerful than overt confrontation? How do you measure strength? Through appearances, words, or subtle influence? And most importantly, when faced with consequences we don't fully understand, do we grow from the experience, or do we allow arrogance and denial to blind us to the truth?